and I think it will be similar in Botswana.
Yes, yes. No, it is quite good. We have a symposium here on TFCAs and mobilities. We have colleagues and students coming from the biological sciences and environmental humanities and social sciences. So it's quite exciting.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, I had to excuse myself to come and present here, but it's the last session anyway. I've got two colleagues who are holding the fort.
Okay, great. And I hear you have met Samanti already, and I think Dinara, have you met Prof. Ramutsindela? And then I think we can start, can we?
Yes, sure. We had some few moments of introduction before, so I think we can start. I see participants joining.
Shall we give them a few more minutes before we start? It's just 14:50. Are all our students here, Samanti? I think so. I see.
They're joining. I see a few of them joining in.
And I see also some people from the University of Pretoria. Manu, I don't know if you saw that Noreen also sent it out there at the University of Pretoria, since you are at that department now. So she invited her colleagues.
Our marketing person shared they shared the invitation. So we have a crowd that we always bring together.
And that was from Future Africa, not from the faculty.
It's from Future Africa. I'm not sure whether it was sent by the faculty, but the contact person was at Future Africa. We have a communication manager.
Okay, then I think Dinara, it looks like people are in, so we can start. So welcome all of you to today's Nexus seminar. It is co-hosted by UNU Flores. This is the United Nations University Institute for Integrated Management of Material Fluxes and of Resources. I'm very proud that I can say that this space by now. The easy way is just to say UNU Flores. And the Dresden University of Technology, in particular PRISMA, which is the Center for Sustainability Assessment and Policy. And you can also see here today Prof. Samanti Dijkstra Silva. She is the Karlowitz Junior Professor for Sustainability Assessment and Policy, and she represents TU Dresden and PRISMA. My name is Zerena Kutsia. I'm from UNU Flores, and I'm very happy to welcome you here today. And also with us today, you see Dinara Dikambayeva. She is the Education Associate at UNU Flores, and she will help us with Zoom support in case there are any questions. So just before we start, some background about the Nexus seminar. This series was established in 2015, and it features speakers, typically senior researchers on topics of sustainability and the resource nexus. And this nexus we see as the integrated management of environmental resources so that one can identify synergies and trade-offs. And then once you know these, you can leverage them. Today's seminar is actually number 81, as you see on the screen, and I will introduce Professor Manu Ramutsindela in a moment. Before we start, how it's going to work. So the speaker will start with a presentation of their work. If you have any questions for the speaker, you can post them in the question and answer session, which you see, I think, at the bottom or at the right. And then Samanti and I will moderate these questions after the presentations. We will read your questions and then the speaker will get an opportunity to answer them. And if you have any technical difficulties, please do not use the Q&A session, but the regular chat function, and then Dinara behind the scenes will help you. So then let's get to the really interesting stuff for today. We have here today Professor Manu Ramutsindela. He is the Future Africa Research Chair in Sustainability Transformations. He has a joint appointment between the University of Pretoria and the University of Cape Town at Future Africa. And for those of you who don't know, both of those universities are research-intensive universities in South Africa. And Future Africa is the University of Pretoria's collaborative platform for research that works across the sciences and with society to address Africa's biggest and most urgent contemporary challenges. And I briefly looked at the data we have from previous speakers. Samanti, maybe you also know, but I think this is about only the second speaker we have from Africa. Maybe I didn't get the full list on our server, but I think it's only the second one. So Manu, we're really looking forward to hearing the African voice here. Prof. Manu Ramutsindela is a human geographer. He's received many accolades for his research in human geography, conservation, and socio-ecological relations. And he started his studies at the University of the North, which I recently got to know very well through a research project. It's now known as the University of Limpopo, and actually quite a few distinguished South Africans, including our president, got their education there in the old apartheid system. Today, he will focus on reframing sustainability through the lens of socio-ecological debt. He will tell us more about this, what socio-ecological debt is, the interconnections there are between ecology and humans, pathways towards sustainability, and then how we can get justice in this environmental context. So over to you, Manu. We are looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you very much, Serena, and everybody in the team who has given me this opportunity to share my thoughts, but also to learn from the audience through engaging with the questions that you would pose and your own experiences. I just, before I continue, just check. I think there's something going on in the background, Dinara. I can hear the talk. I'm not sure whether something is open.
I don't hear the talks, but Professor Serena, is it better now?
I also don't hear any background noise, and I see all the attendees are muted.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that's fine. Maybe something is open on my side. Okay, that's fine. Let's not waste time. What I thought I would do today is just to share with you my thoughts, which have developed over time, and are leading me to some interesting questions that I've been grappling with. So I will be drawing on my experience of connectedness and how we conceptualize this connectedness, and also refer to some elements of connections. And I use the word connectedness more broadly to open up our thinking about a nexus, and with the view that we also need to broaden what we think about nexus as a concept. And the reason for doing that is that the concept gives us the opportunity to explain the world, to research the world, but concepts can also constrain our understanding of the very issues that we want to deal with, or that we want to research. For this lecture, I have been inspired by thinking about problems from different disciplinary backgrounds, solutions that are offered from different sources, and how the public react to those solutions or understand them. But in order to do so, which I will explain in the next few slides, is to begin to bring together different disciplinary focal points. For example, bringing in history, science, conservation, debates on capitalism, discussions on philanthropy and conservation, violence. So I will restrict myself to environmental protection as an example of how these disciplines connect, how the themes connect, and how our conceptualizations of those connections work out in practice. So just to give you an example of where all this started, without revealing my age, I started thinking about some of the key issues in South Africa post 1994, which emerged after democracy. There was a very strong urge to do land reform to correct the mistakes and injustices of the past. And one of my focal areas were the national parks in South Africa and what was going to happen to them. So I first thought about the Nexus without going into the conceptualization of it through the paper that I wrote in 2003. That was looking at what was going on in South Africa's protected area through the lens of land reform. And so the Kruger National Park, which is our well-known and first-generation national park in South Africa, and one would say it is one of the first generations on the continent as well. It's not necessarily the first national park on the continent, but it's the first generation, a century-old national park. And come 1994, there were land claims. And I can talk more about land claims in protected areas, but the reason for bringing this up is just to give you a sense of how I started thinking about protecting the environment, biodiversity, and social issues, and how these link together, or perhaps how they are disconnected. So that's how I got interested in the connections. So I had to understand policies about land reform. I had to understand the constitution of the country. I also had to understand the different views that are grounded on different disciplines that were being put forward to either push for land reform in protected areas or to defend protected areas against land reform. So there was quite a lot of debate, and this got me interested in land reform issues. So what I have ultimately done was to do field work in the national park. The Kruger National Park was the first national park in the country to have the land claims, and this sparked debates, and lots of ideas were put forward. And at the same time, there was mining prospecting that was about to go on in the same area. And as I will show in the next slide, there was a proposal to have transboundary protected areas, including the Kruger National Park. And at the time, the Kruger National Park and the transboundary, for which it was going to be a core area, was going to be disturbed by this protected area, by this land claims. So that's how it all started. And it really made me think about different connections that are emerging in the desire and even intention to merge both social justice issues and land reform. And so this was also the project that was emerging. And I must say, I'm still very much involved in researching transboundary protected areas. In the Southern African region, we call them transfrontier conservation areas. They're also called peace parks. So I was involved in this. So I drew this map in 2007. And not much has changed in terms of the arguments that I was trying to make at the time. And one of the arguments were that these areas, as you can see from the map,
I've lost sound. Am I the only one?
I also lost sound.
I think he is frozen. Wonder whether it's the connection.
Yeah, possibly so. Oh,
uh,
yes.
We lost you for a while, Manu. Are you back? Yes.
yes, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you again. Thanks.
All right, okay, thanks. Okay. So yeah, please just let me know if there's a connection problem.
Yeah, I think the last thing I heard is about the transboundary areas on this map.
All right, thanks. So the transboundary part of this came about also after 1994. Of course, one can go back to history of protected areas on the continent, but we don't have much time to do that. What was happening was in 1996, rather, proposals were beginning to come to the public domain about how protected areas in the region and the continent are going to be connected across political borders. And the circles that you see on the map are about those projects that were already taking place when this map was drawn. And some of them have already mushroomed and consolidated. But at the time, I was then somehow challenged to think about different areas of knowledge, domains. And one, of course, is the biological diversity. How this is going to be protected in the region, but also to think about, as I alluded to earlier, the question of land, which has not been resolved in post-colonial up to today, and how this was going to be impacted. There were also issues about economic, how economic growth could be promoted in some ways through these projects, where you bring tourism across political borders and get countries to share on the fruits of tourism. So that's how I started thinking about this. But what I want to do today is not to take you back to all these points, but just to give that background. What I want to do today is to show, to talk about three things, to show those connections. And one is ecological destruction and human degradation. I want to bring this together to help us think about sustainability, not in one direction, but to think about sustainability in both the socio-ecological socio-ecological connections, but also to think of the pathways to sustainability, which we understand and push from different perspectives. And the current debates about reparation and redistributive justice, and linking all these to issues of sustainability. In order to do this, I use the concept of socio-ecological debt. So the concept itself, it's interesting because it bridges the divide between ecological disruptions and human degradation, and I'll explain this as I go on. And I want to also make some propositions, and I've numbered them. You will see as I proceed. So my first proposition that I want to talk to is that ecological destruction and the degradation of people or humans should be at the core of sustainability thinking, approaches, and programs. And I think this is what we might want to discuss about sustainability. And I'll show that sustainability is skewed towards one direction or the other, and sometimes we lose out on providing or thinking about solutions that speak to both ecological and social issues together, and to have those connections. So this is how I think about ecological destructions and human degradation within the concept of sustainability. There are two main groups, or two main schools of thought, and there could be the third one, the fourth one, can number them, but let me talk about two schools of thought that might help us to understand socio-ecological debt. One is that we should go back to the histories and see what has gone wrong and try to correct. The example I gave about land reform in the Kruger National is one example of that we need to correct the histories. We need to deal with the histories of land dispossessions, the histories of forced removals in order to create the park. And this is not limited to South Africa. The histories of relocation for national parks can be found in different parts of the world. So there's a school of thought which emphasizes that particular way of taking history as a starting point for the sustainability of the world and where heading to. There's another school of thought which emphasizes the future is coming to us. You know, if we can't correct history, we can't redesign history, we can't change the history, can only look at the future. No, the future is already here, and we need to work very swiftly to try and resolve some of the issues that will make the future bright for both humans and other beings. So these are maybe the two schools of thought that I want to speak to illuminate what socio-ecological debt might help us to think of sustainability perhaps in a broader sense. We can start with ecological destruction. We all know that every year we have to do, there are reports about the state of the planet, for example. And more importantly, where we are in terms of the tipping points, in terms of planetary boundaries, and what needs to be done. There are major meetings every year or every second year that tries to say this is what we need to do to ensure life life on the planet. And that's why the agent. And what these approaches, or these concerns have done is to allow us to be creative, to say what is it that we can do to ensure that we don't collapse our ecological systems and life on Earth. And we have incentives, we have different ways of encouraging people to change their behaviors. Some of the ways are punitive, and others are incentives. And one good incentive is the Earthshot Prize, which is supported by the British royalty. And more recently, there have been awards for people who are coming up with solutions. I've just listed the 5 projects that won this prize. And what is common about this project is that they're all trying to develop methodologies, strategies to deal with the current problems, to ensure that we have got the planet and life on the planet secured. And so the list goes on for the kind of prices that are what. The point I want to make about this is that if you look at these solutions, they are all trying to solve ecological problems, but they have been concerned that some of these solutions are really talking about the Anthropocene, or influenced by what we call the Anthropocene, and how humans have fundamentally transformed the planet and the system that supports life on Earth. And so the criticism from scholars has been that if we take the Anthropocene as our starting point towards sustainability, we may not account for the thought pattern and actions that have developed, and that are also destructive to all other living things. So the argument is not to throw away the Anthropocene as a concept, but to think about other thought patterns and actions that are destructive to all living things, and not just to particular living things. And so there have been alternative suggestions about where we need to start, what else needs to be thought about. And those who are looking at the destruction of the planet, they could blame capitalism and say, well, if you have capitalism as the process of profit making, you will always have this environmental degradation. You will always have environmental destructions if we think of the oils, the gas, mining, and so on. And so what we need to think about is to have environmental transformations that would make sure that we don't have that destruction. And as I will show later, the different views about how that will be done. In other words, what to do with capitalism, as one alternative of ensuring that we have good sustainability. And there are those who go back to plantations times, where both ecological and human beings were put under very difficult conditions, and argue that those historical moments and their ongoing concerns should not be ignored, because they do have a huge impact. And others there are many terminologies that are coming up, but others are trying to say, well, there are just too many temporalities that we have to deal with, and the forces that are changing the way we live on the planet. And we have to pay attention to that. What these alternative narratives are suggesting is that we need a much broader conceptions of sustainability that are attentive to a number of key factors in society and on the environment in which they live. So this brings us to another proposition, that pathways to sustainability would have to think about how we transform the journal's phase of research in the first instance. And in order to do that, I want to suggest that we would need to think about socio-ecological debt. And thinking about socio-ecological debt as one of the focal areas for achieving sustainability might help us to bridge these gaps, both in theory and in practice. And I will delve into this proposition now. Socio-ecological debt. I mean, we could understand it in different ways, but it simply means that we have got harms that are done to both ecological conditions and human conditions. We have got harms that need to be considered for both the planet and humanity, and that these are inseparable, both in thought and practice. So in other words, ecological debt is a concept that would allow us to think seriously about this. My view is that if we use socio-ecological debt, we will be more sensitive about how we solve the problems that we are dealing with. You know, say for instance, if we're dealing with deforestation, what are the impact of that to the environment itself, and what are the impact of that approach to society as well, and trying to put this impact as important, as equally important, rather than to say this is more important than the other, because it sort of reverses the very same sustainability goals that we want to achieve. So these are some of the way we can think about the harms through socio-ecological debt. On the environmental harms, we're all familiar with that. We know that biological diversity has been impacted by industrialization, has been impacted by a host of other factors, including capitalism itself. And we know that there are the species that we have lost. There are key stone species that are critical for our ecological systems. We know that we need to keep some of the structures within our ecological systems in order to ensure life on Earth, and how those structures function in reality, to keep some relationship to species in the charts and so on. So we're very mindful about these environments, and of course there are disciplines that are dedicated to these concerns. Or every year we've got reports on where we are with these harms. But we also have to think about environmental harm and social justice, social harms, where we have got human and socio-economic harms that could be understood as socio-economic rights. We also have from the UNDP a number of areas that are measured on an annual basis. Now, the exploitations and systems of governance, how they perhaps are doing harm, how they do harm to society, how they create difficulties within society, and pushing for systems of governance that are more inclusive and that are attentive to the diversity of people on planet. And there are quite a number of examples that we can list under this thing. The point I want to make is that there is this silence in thinking about social debt. That there is a point to the environmental harms on one hand, and this is in line with the schools of thought that I sketched before. We also have those who are more on the socio-ecological side. Now, what this system has done to think of ecological restorations in particular ways, and one of the ways becoming more pronounced and even more popular is rewilding. That we should bring back the kind of environmental conditions that have been destroyed, and rewilding takes place in different ways. I'll show you some of the strategies for that. And there are organizations that are dedicated to rewilding. There are donors that are dedicated to rewilding because they think that that's how we can address ecological restoration. And one of the most respected scholar, Edward Wilson, made a proposal on how we should have half the earth put aside to ensure ecological restoration and the sustainability and life on Earth. And the list goes on. There are a number of well-known people, and some of them documentaries. We can all watch these things on YouTube and other materials. And as we know, this has led to this push for which we call 30 by 30 now, that by 2030 we should have 30% of terrestrial landscapes under status of one type of. And countries are working hard to do that, and it is also in line with the SDGs, which also did as the year of delivery, which we understand, as the studies have shown, that we are far away from reaching those. So that is an ecological restoration that emphasizes the environmental. And there's nothing wrong with it. It is harnessing the specialization that people have, and they can talk to worldly issues through the disciplinary background and that. But what one needs to think about is what those types of ecological restorations do to society, do to the environment. We know much work has been done on trying to protect, to avoid desert from marching on, and we could plant trees and do other things, especially in the Sahel. The question, of course, is whether the kind of trees that we plant will change the environment for better or for worse. So these are the questions that we have. Whether we introduce new species into the environment. Has been a problem of alien species, for example, And I'm using this concept with coaching, but it's got lots of implications, even for society. The concept of alien is used both for plants and people in official documents. So what happens in society? And this is just one example of a study area that I had first-hand experience of some of the implications. And this the field work it was done in 2018 really made me start to think about these issues. In the Khaza transfrontier conservation area, which many people are proud to say it is the biggest conservation area in the world, which brings 5 countries together to try and manage environmental and social issues. But what has happened in the Khaza, and I'm giving an example from the Zambian side. So in order to rewild the Khaza, animals had to be translocated from different parts of the region to the Khaza. The picture of the fence that you see there was in preparation for the relocation of animals. And during fieldwork, I wanted to understand what these would mean for the people living in the area. And there are those who rely on the water bodies around. They rely on fishing for livelihood. And there's also a market. The picture that shows the buildings there with a green roof, you have got a market where people go and sell the fish that they harvest. But that's not going to be easily possible with a fence that has been created in order to rewild. But it is not only the livelihood that's affected. The school which is in the area had to deal with the problem of kids who were afraid to come to school because some of the animals had been introduced closer to the schools, and they were scared about these animals and spent some days not going to school. And this was something that was not perhaps thought about or even anticipated. And the reason that we do not always think about this is a silo approach to sustainability and ecological restoration, where ecological restoration does not include the restoration of society or social sustainability at some point. And so from the social side, there are people who would say, well, it is time to end a system that is destroying our environment. And this is what could bring about sustainability. In other words, the world will never be sustainable. The planet will never be protected and sustained over a long period of time or into the future if we still have issues of the past that we haven't resolved. And then there's a call for reparations. And of course, reparations take different forms, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And much work has also been done from the environmental humanities on environmental justice. And much of this work was done in the United States about dumping that had got that was class-based, so dump waste in marginalized sectors of society. And these are marginalized in different ways and on the basis of many reasons. And there are those who also call for traditional ecological knowledge to be part of sustainability transformation, which it is important to note. So the point here is that from the social science perspective, there is the view that we need to correct some of the inadequacies in society that will be necessary for us to have a sustainable world. So, what is common with all these calls in the social sciences or environmental humanity is to pay attention to social epistemic and environmental justice. So that's the core. But perhaps sustainability can be enhanced by making sure that there is environmental justice at the core of what we do. And that we should respect all forms of knowledge that can help us to understand what we need to do. There is quite a number of studies that have generated data that are being used to decide on programs of actions. But obviously it depends on kind of knowledge that we think it. So on the social justice side, there's an argument that what we need to do is to have reparation as an important component of sustainability. In other words, we cannot move forward. We cannot sustain the planet if society itself has got all these challenges. Many of them have got historical roots, and we have got to attend to them. And hence there is restitution, and this takes us back to my earlier example of the Kruger again, where restitution was also part of the discussion on reparation, that in order to protect national parks in South Africa, we need to have some restitution. There's also a call for different ways of compensating. There are also different ideas about compensation. And one form of compensation that is becoming popular is simply an acknowledgement of the owners of the land. And this is becoming common practice at universities in Australia whenever they hold a conference. If I were presenting this in Australia, the best thing to do presenting this on someone's land was to acknowledge the owners of the land. And that has become standard practice. I've seen it in other places as well, but my first experience was the way owners of the land acknowledged in Australia. And this is another form of reparation where you simply, it's not costly in terms of money and so forth, but it restores the dignity of the people who have suffered them. And sometimes we think that reparation is just about one thing, that we need to either give people money or this or that. It takes different forms. I think the onus is on those who are seeking sustainability, pushing for sustainability, to be mindful of some of the harms that have been done to society and find a way of dealing with them. In some cases, governments give projects to those people who have been harmed in the past as a form of reparation. And the list goes on. Reparation takes different. But of course, within the social sciences, there are also those who says, well, maybe reparation is not necessarily the best option because it is not inclusive. You're only dealing with a group of people. What you need to do is to address societal issues as a whole. So if there's poverty, in an area, you cannot say we'll give jobs to those people who suffered in the past. Rather, try and improve everyone's livelihood in society. And that's a liberal philosophy, which is influenced by ideas of egalitarianism, where we all equal in society, trying to deal with classes and how we differentiate between classes. And suggestions of the wealth tax, for instance, have been made to say, if you have got the wealth tax, you can then address societal problems. And improving human conditions, that's the other. You can therefore improve the conditions of systems that support life. So there are implications on how we frame sustainability. And my view is that we need sustainability that is understood through a relational approach. We have to be able to connect many aspects of sustainability that brings both the biophysical environment and social issues, and put them on the same scale in terms of importance. But in order to do that, we need to think of transformative research. And by transformative research here, I mean a combination of things, mainly thought processes, how we think about the issues. What the disciplines have done to all of us is to make us think from a particular point of view, and so that's perhaps what has been, maybe the advances in the disciplines, but also their weaknesses. Advances in the sense that we can understand things more deeply. By the way, our challenge with global warming has to do with the discipline that we're working in the atmosphere, to try and see that, there is a whole that is developing here. And we all started understanding what the implications of that as a whole would be, and measuring things until where we now have a better understanding of climate systems. So that was a discipline that allowed us to do so. But the solutions themselves do not rely on those disciplines. So we need thought patterns that would allow us to move beyond the disciplines. And also for sustainability that pushes for societal change. And I think there's much work that has been done to change society behaviors and so on, using both punitive and incentives to do so. And hence there's a call for transdisciplinarity that is on the cards now, that will help us to have a sustainability concepts that are more richer than what we currently have. So these are just the implications for framing sustainability through socio-ecological. It forces us to be relational in approach. It brings transformative research, and it elevates the importance of transdisciplinarity that I'm sure you have heard about in the previous seminars. So going back to, before I'm about to conclude now, but going back to the initial thought that triggered what I'm talking about now, is that we have the transfrontier conservation areas that are important. And what these have done, at least for me, is to challenge, to start thinking about biodiversity shared natural resources, governance and the systems, legislations across systems, and also to think conceptually about what it means to connect ecological systems, to maintain ecological integrity in areas where there are huge societal problems, and to begin to think about how those solutions could avoid taking us in the direction of solving one problem and creating many others. So that's sort of the way I think about this. And I mean, I can go to the different case studies where I've done the research. But in short, this is the message that I have. And thank you for giving me the audience. These are the thoughts that I thought these are the thoughts I wanted to share with you. And I'll be happy to learn from you as you reflect on these ideas. So thank you very much, Sarita.
Thank you so much, Arno. There are quite a few questions in the question and answers. Before we go there, I wanted to, this last thing that you said triggered me. So how can we, you said, how can we, if we fix one thing, we don't break many others? I think that for us also is quite important here at Uniflores, is if we look at, you know, the many resources. So we fix the water issue and then we create an energy issue. And something that I like that you talked about today is about people's values and also society. So from your experience in these transboundary areas, has this been successfully implemented, that we solve problems, or is it very often we just look at the conversation and we forget society, like you explained in that example from Zambia?
Well, this the discussion we're having at the symposium here in Botswana now, and we have people who are working on the ground. We have researchers, different stages of their careers, and we're all reflecting on this. So there are places where society has social groups have been able to access resources that they wouldn't access before, and we just had this this morning about the Botswana side of the Kalahari. The Kalahari trying to get the Kalahari is here. This is where the Kalahari is, and the study was on the Botswana on the Botswana side. This was was interesting to see what ordinary people think about these spaces. You know, some are able to do the things that they were not able to do, but on the other hand, you also have those who were able to do certain things that they can't do now. Okay? And so I think it is still evolving in terms of, you know, which benefits, which areas are more beneficial in terms of both conservation and society. Those in the biological sciences have documented areas where the biodiversity has improved, for example. But you also have areas in society where some of the things have become more problematic. I'll give an example. You know, in the Kruger National Park, where we have one of the first, well, I'll say the second project. When we had challenge of rhino poaching, for example, it reverses to some of the relations that were beginning to emerge. because the locals become suspects of, with they're associated with those who are assisting the poachers, for example. And some poaching on the Mozambican side is was associated in the past with some of the grievances that they've had, because they had to be moved out of the Limpopo National Park on the Mozambican side in order to have this transboundary conservation. And because of those removals, and we're talking about the park that was established in 2001, so it's not even colonial national park. And so I think it's just the way that we still have this silo approach that if we do good conservation, we will have these benefits to society. But what we need to think about is how fixing conservation problems need to be part and parcel of the societal problems that we have. So we still have that issue even with the new transboundary conservation. There are variations depending on where one is working.
Yeah, and I guess depending on the country and the culture, these issues will be different. I'm going to switch to the questions that on the panel now, and I'm going to start from the bottom. Unless Samanti, did you still have a question? Can I go to the questions then? So the one at the bottom says, in terms of social justice reparation, how to address the belief of people about to not leave their land of their ancestors. I guess this talks.
Sorry, Serena, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
In terms of social justice reparation, how to address the belief of people about to not leave their land of their ancestors. So I guess the question is, so if people don't want to leave the land of their ancestors, can you do any reparation? That would be my interpretation of this question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question that people who are creating ecological corridors are grappling with, because they would like to shift. So there's quite a lot of planning going on here to try and integrate development plans across the country. But in the planning, some of the challenges that come up is the question of land, because land means different things to different people. And so, for example, those who are using land for commercial purposes, which is what we have here in the on the border between Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa. We have got some of the most important agricultural producers. Much of the tomatoes in South Africa come from that area. Because there is the Limpopo Nation, there is the Limpopo River, which is the boundary between Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and goes into Mozambique. And so, those who have got agricultural fields, and these are commercial agriculture, they don't want to leave the land. Actually, they don't even want to sell the land, even if you offer them money to say sell the land so we can use it for protected areas. They want to leave it for their families. The thing is the wealth that the family members should inherit. Now, because of that, you have people who would say the land matters more than what these transfrontier conservations want to do. But you go to the some of the rural areas where people rely on the land, and I don't think the question that we need to grapple with should be, how to move them out of the land. It's why do we need to move them off the land? they've been moved in the past, and why do we need to move them now? And I think that's an important question. And it speaks to this social justice that I've referred to. Some of those people don't have the rights to land. The first thing to do would be to give them the rights to land, and they can negotiate out the benefits. Actually, people who have the rights to land, land rights in those areas, are able to negotiate better benefits than those who do not have the land rights. But this is not universal. It varies from place to place. So I think that we should broaden our understanding of social justice and what reparation might mean. I just imagine if you have got governments that have been instrumental in removing people, relocating people. We haven't had any, I don't know of any government that has gone back to communities and said, sorry, we should not have removed. We're sorry. It's just saying we're sorry. I mean, we see this happening at the global stage where, Prince Charles, King Charles, for instance, in the UK will go to the former islands and make an apology. Of course, people want more than an apology. They want something material. But in these places, I haven't come across even non-governmental organizations that have been working together with governments, donors that have been sponsoring some of these projects, going back to the communities and say, we're sorry, we should not have done that to you. I haven't come across that. Well, maybe it is there. I might not have read enough material to really come to. But that's sort of things that we need to think about in these areas and have social justice that is both at the abstract level and at the material level, where once people have apologized, they need to do something.
And I guess there's also this tension between the monetary or the material value of land versus the qualitative, there's just a value in land that you not necessarily to to monetary use it, but to use it for other purposes. That's there are different views of the value of land, I guess, and then also the value of what the reparation should be. Yeah. So let's go back.
No, that's important. Thank you for making it. And this is what social justice should grapple with. It's how do we approach the question of land? It's not just about we need to move these people out, because some of the disconnections that will happen there will make society to really have very serious problems. If the land is part of the spiritual home and that land is not there, it's almost like you've taken the fish out of water.
Exactly. Let's move on to the next question. Here it says, what lessons can we take from previous incidences of new species introduction gone wrong for ecological restoration process? So do you want me to repeat it? So what lessons can we take from previous incidents of new species introduction gone wrong for ecological restoration process? Don't know if you have experience with that in one of the transboundary areas.
No, thanks. I don't have much experience with that. But I know of cases where the introduction of new species, for instance, have had damaging effect on water. People sometimes don't understand that this kind of species would do damage to the environment itself. And we simply assume that, because we are losing the species, we should bring more of them to this area. We should bring the area back to what it was before. And those kind of ideas are problematic in the sense that we need to understand that the soil quality has changed. The environmental conditions have changed, and we need to understand exactly the implications of that when we introduce new species.
And I guess based on your talk today, there's also an implication for society. I mean, if we reintroduce certain species, it could also have an impact on the way people live, like this example of where they were afraid of going to school.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So let's take the next question. What collaboration do we need for a harmonious growth pattern that sets a better link between our economic growth, nature restoration, and while protecting our valuable natural entity intact? Well, protecting our natural entity intact. So what collaboration do we need for a harmonious growth pattern that sets a better link between our economic growth, nature restoration, while protecting our valuable natural entity, I guess, while keeping our valuable natural entity intact?
So I suggested a relational approach. I think that relational approach should not be just about bringing different disciplines together and say we want to tackle, we want to solve this problem. We have to define the problem together in the first instance. I think part of the problem is how we define the problem that we want to solve. So going back to the earlier questions about the communities and the land and so forth. In most cases, they are not necessarily involved in some of these discussions. They don't know the transplanted conservation is going to come into their area in the first place. And so when we have a transfrontier conservation area and we say, let's bring in people, we already have defined the problem we want to solve, and we just want them to come along. What might be useful, which is what the International Science Council is promoting now, is to have to redefine the problem together with those who are going to be affected by the solution. So it is important that collaboration should not be based on adding on quite a number of stakeholders into the discussions, but it should be based on sitting together and defining the problem together, listening to one another, irrespective of our social positions, our political positions, our economic positions, irrespective of our nationalities in these spaces where we have got transboundary protected areas, so that everybody has a voice in the kinds of discussions, in the kinds of questions that we all need to address. And that collaboration then will be much more useful. I think the kind of collaboration that is based on bringing economists, environmental scientists, political scientists, biologists, and so forth, is not going to help us, because it will keep us in those silos in the way we think about the solution, because we haven't defined the problem together. I think that's a challenge that we have. If we are able to define the problem together, without any bias about what the problem is, we will be able to have a collaborative approach that will that will be centered on equality, that will be centered on the respect that we all need, and that will be guided by norms of ethical norms and justice that are important for sustainability.
This very interesting. This reminds me of a recent discussion we had at the Dresden Nexus workshop at the end of last year. It was also about involving stakeholders, and this was more on water, energy, food, and the many solutions they had found for this nexus. But the challenge remained how to involve, especially here, the issue was marginalized communities, because very often you have the governments involved, but then you forget about the people on the ground who will be affected by this solution. So nicely connects to that discussion that we had. And then I'm moving on to the last question, which was the first one that was posed. It says, amid such anthropogenic impacted climate changes, how challenging is it for lower income countries to sustain economic crisis with community partnerships towards joint development? So I guess I can rephrase this. How challenging is it for lower income countries to sustain economic crisis with community partnerships towards joint development in the face of anthropogenic impacted climate changes?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
A mouthful.
I think it's, yeah, I think it's in developing economies, you also have areas that are economically depressed. And what people tend to do is to say, if we do this, we'll bring development. And this is part of the arguments for this cross-border conservation. Is that if you have these 5 countries coming together and you give the tourist a uni-visa, sort of a Schengen visa of conservation areas, they will move across these spaces, enjoy them, and they will leave the money behind. And that money can then help the communities and the governments to improve their economies. And that sounds, a good proposition. But then what happens is that maybe by the time they come here, they've paid for accommodation, they've paid for travels somewhere in their home countries. And actually the economic spin-offs are limited. You can have a few things to sell and so forth. So we need to also to rethink the kind of economy that will bring about the kinds of development that are appropriate to this area. And not to suggest that economic models that have worked for the countries in developed economies would work in developing economy or low-income countries. But there are also commonalities, and this is where capitalism manages to move across spaces and to adapt to different conditions. We should be able to think about economic models that are suitable to the places where development as required and understood by those countries, by those communities, should be promoted. I think there's also a science of development where we think, for example, bring tourism here and then you will have development. Well, maybe it's a fertile area where people just need to have agriculture and be supported to have agriculture. They will have food on the table. And that will bring the spin-offs such as health in those environments. They are able to, you can improve agriculture and link the products to the bigger markets, allow those local produce to circulate in wider markets, including international trade and so forth. So I think part of the problem is to think of development. One of my favorite idea of development is Amartya Sen's development as freedom, giving people the freedom to think of development and to develop themselves. But in the economic system in which we live today, which is neoliberal in nature, one has to find mechanisms of ensuring that the kind of development that is proposed is also going to work for the communities or the nations that are going to implement those development models. And I think there isn't much chance to do that when the interest of some of the donors, and the donors could be NGO, could be countries in the developed economies, There could be individuals, there could be trust or some other formations. We don't know what their interests are when they want a kind of development. And I'll give you this story which made me think about development in the way that I'm trying to describe it here. There was a time I wanted to go to one of the transfrontier conservation areas in the early years of the development, and I was looking for accommodation. And the number that came up when I wanted to book for accommodation was a US number. I needed to call that number to book accommodation in South Africa. And I just think that the model of economies that we have here might not work for the kinds of development we all desire, because we haven't understood the models that are at play in the conservation areas that we have. And by the way, these are to bring about sustainability, to improve economies, to improve the environment, and so forth. But if the model that is being used, I mean, to answer the question directly, is not sensitive to the kinds of development that these areas require, we're just going to perpetuate the kinds of inequalities that are there in the system. And that's for me, it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, that's a very good example, I think. And I guess it's also, I mean, this is where the politics come in. It's a question of power. So the local communities are not the ones in a power position. They're not the stakeholders with the power who can change things. So we need to change people's heads to change this. I think, oh, wait a minute. Is there another question now? No. That was our last question. So then we've answered all the questions on the panel. Samanthi, some comments from your side or questions?
I don't have a comment, but I do like first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It's off the topic. I wanted to share that this seminar series and the course that we've had has been nominated as a e-learning gem, actually, and today is the last day of voting, and so I asked Dinara if you could please share the link for everyone, so everyone that's a member of TUD, whether as a researcher or a lecturer or a student, you can vote for this seminar series. So we would really be happy if you supported us in this, and I think Dinara will post it in the chat in just a minute.
Good.
For everyone to see.
Thank you. So is it there now?
I think yes, because
Good.
let me just copy it once again. So everyone.
Then with that, while Dinara is posting that, I would like to thank Prof. Ramutsindela today for his presentation. This was, I think, a very interesting African perspective. And I guess when you are in research, you always get confronted with all the challenges. So the end of the world's challenges will never be there. And this societal challenge, I think, is a very interesting one, especially in an African perspective, from a resource perspective, and how these things are interconnected and the relational approach that one should follow. So thank you very much, Manu, for your presentation today and for dialing in from Botswana. I would